So when you're engaged in some type of, I guess any type of self-improvement process, we do know there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. There's a lot of ways to success, and lots of very reputable sources will say, they'll put right-left barriers and boundaries to what they suggest work, and they're not wrong in terms of the value of that. But may not always be practical, may not be, actually there might be something unique about any one individual that canned method doesn't work. So I think for me, in terms of my own nutrition, not necessarily what I may suggest for somebody else, but over the last several years, and now many, many years, but I'm pretty sure I've seen 213 on the scale many, many years ago, from powerlifting time in Philly. I might have seen 215, so that means I must have been 220 at some point. So 220 at 5'4.5" is very, very heavy. I recently got down to 173, and probably now I'm around 180. Over a long period of time, I could say that I have an idea of what works for me to push-pull. And I think you can start to gain confidence in what works for you from nutrition, what I call hitting the button. On one of the apps that I use, you can plot two things at once, and you can see how they run next to each other. And one is body weight. The one I've used is body weight and total calories. So in theory, when your body weight is up here, you want your calories to be here so that this goes down, okay? But when you do things in a particular way that I'll get to, which of course includes very intelligent training, of which again has a whole nother list of core values that work for you, especially depending where you start from. There's a point that your weight goes down, when your calories are here, and then all of a sudden, your because you feel like you've hit the right thing, you're following the right advice, your calories go up and your weight continues to go down. So when you hit that X, I call that like hitting the button. And that's where you kind of draw a circle and you ask a whole bunch of questions of what it is that you did in order to basically, what we know about nutrition and training, that is very, very logical for that to happen. But in the grand scheme of things, wait a minute, so you're eating more and you're still losing weight, or you're eating more and not gaining weight? How is that possible? Well, there's lots of things that are possible, but for nutrition, the things that I have found to be successful for me, number one is low fat. Of course, there's probably suggestions that we shouldn't, for a long period of time, be below certain amounts of fat. We need the fat. But I would take it the opposite, where I found that people would actually be very low calorie, but high fat, thinking that the fats that they were eating, like avocado, like nuts, etc., that these were healthy fats, and they are. Except a lot of those things are not terribly satiating, and if for any 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. So I would kind of rather have a gram of carbs or protein, which are 4 calories, and I could have one of each and still have less calories and fat. So when you try to find periods of time where you fall into certain foods, which is kind of how I would eat. I would say I could eat anything I want. I just track everything. I don't know if that makes me a heuristic, but everything has calories. So calories in, calories out. So that way, if I do want to eat something that maybe someone else says is not a good idea or not healthy, I track it and I dance. But I have found that when I get on a good run and when I want to, especially when I want to hit that button and drop weight but still maintain whatever it is that I want to look like, low fat is sometimes below 40. I think there's probably some suggestion that consistently being below 40, certainly below 30 is, and I'm not even talking about bodybuilding, that's a whole nother animal, but for me, being able to have whatever amount of calories I'm going to have from whatever my goals are in terms of getting bigger or smaller, if I can do it with less fat, I never get hungry because I'm able to eat almost double, somewhat more than double by definition, of protein and carbs, which are going to be way more satiating than the fats that I typically like to eat. So I would say a core value is high calorie or proper calorie, low fat, and all my fats are incidental. I don't eat anything. It's not that I won't have avocado, but it would be incidental. It would be already in the salad or the sandwich or something like that I ordered. It would never be something, if I was going to make a salad or have some, I would never use avocado. If it happens to be in the house, I didn't buy it, and you would use it, and then we track it, and then you just kind of, play out the hand. But everything that I would have would be like the fat that was in the protein. So it would be in the chicken, it'd be in the chicken thighs, it'd be in the steak or hamburger. It's not this individual thing where you would say hamburger is a protein, but we know it's a higher fat, even if it's in the 90s, etc. So that would be a core value, would be low fat, and I'm not terribly hungry. As it relates to fat, I would try to not have fat immediately after training. It would be several hours after training. My knowledge, or how I've been told, was that fat would delay gastric emptying, and that would not be a desirable thing while you're refueling from training. But the other core value as it relates to post-training, when my AM fasted resting glucose was higher than it should have been, meaning in the low 100s, which is high, my advice was, I don't care how many carbs you're eating that day, your goal is to have 80% of them within 2 hours after training. That just did wonders for me, because if you would have a lot of carbs and then you'd crash, and then you'd kind of have these spikes where your glucose is typically always high, you're fatigued. To me, that is something. Now, I'm not suggesting somebody should try it. I'm not sure that there would be a reason why not to outside of pathologies, but I'm just saying what works for me as a core value. So I am going to go nuts with whatever carbs I feel like eating after training. And again, that would ideally be lower in fat. So whatever those carbs would be, it's not like you're having zero fat, but I would always rather have something chicken, lean chicken, rather than hamburger immediately after training. We'll save it for dinner when we go to Pig Beach. Continuing with what you do after training, all the folks that are anointed sheriffs in nutrition land, there's no such thing as this anabolic window, blah, blah, blah. This is what I think and what has worked for me, which also includes having a very, very significant strength base and having a lifestyle that allows me to train and walk, etc. It doesn't probably matter if you're having the protein 30 minutes, 2 hours after training. I don't know that there's this sensitivity to uptake protein anymore. There is a sensitivity to uptake glucose. That's different. So if your protein shake that you have immediately after training has no carbs, you're probably inclined to believe that there's no such thing as whatever somebody else might call an anabolic window. But if it's high carbs, then you'll probably shield yourself from some of these spikes that if you're eating carbs all day. And of course, the next core value is like carbs aren't bad. There is a lot of angles. And again, obviously I do help people in these spaces, but there's probably people that are better, and I just do what they say. So I think when you see the core value number 3, in terms of your ability to tolerate carbs, and you think you're gluten insensitive. Now, look, if you have celiac, that's different. I don't want you to die. But I'm not sure there's such a thing as gluten insensitive, at least. And if you get mad now, go ahead. Come on, we can knuckle up. But the reality is, before you say that, let's look at, are you in this potentially right on the borderline of pre-diabetic? Remember, if you're like a 5.5, it doesn't mean it's not a 5.7 the day before, where you technically would be pre-diabetic. Blood work is an instant snapshot that's constantly moving. So I value A1C for what I'm about to discuss. And when the A1C is in that range, and your glucose, your AM resting glucose is even in the middle 90s, and then you're going to look at your RMR, which is a number from 0 to 0.8, and it will give you an idea on if you're burning carbs or fat at rest. So let's think of this. Rest is this very, very long activity, very, very low intensity. That should be a primarily aerobic energy systems. And if we're going to use a substrate for the long, low load energy systems, it would much more ideally be fat than carbs, which you have to constantly eat these carbs because you're going to use them really, really quickly. So if your preference is to use carbs at rest, you're kind of screwed. Whether you have a combination of what you look at resting glucose, you look at A1C, you look at all of these, the RMR, but then you look at how they train. There's many different types of cardio. So if you're looking to use fat as a substrate to, rather than carbs to generate glucose, which then generates ATP, you kind of have to have significant mitochondria in order to maintain these lower cost energy systems. Now you go back to EPP, and one of the value points of why, not just for athletic development and repeat sprint ability, but the more mitochondria you have, you at least have the opportunity to create this shift. And maybe that initial shift for somebody is a very low carb diet. So you're forcing them to use fat, but then you're not going to be able to train hard, because the opposite of low intensity, long duration is high intensity, short duration lifting. And that's where carbs are going to be a much more ideal energy source. So now if you're using whatever carbs you have which is inefficient for this long resting period, what do we do? And that would be a period of time where I would do EPP probably for multiple years. You'll find that you can tolerate carbs much better when you use the carbs for training and you're eating them around when you're training, rather than relying on them when they're inefficient at all. So your body will not be very, very tolerant, and you're not going to be able to train hard. And then if you can't train hard, you're not going to build as much muscle mass. You're not going to build as much muscle mass. You're really putting a wrench into this whole body transformation process. So for me, being low fat, there might be days that you get out and you have something that, man, I didn't even know there was that much fat in it. That's how I eat. It's not like this is these blinders on all the time. And then you just kind of have low carb that day, even if it is training, because total calories would be the most important thing. So it's high calories, low fat. That's number one. Number two, 80% of carbs after training. Most carbs in and around training, because 80% can be a lot after when you're getting to very, very high numbers. And having all forms of cardiovascular fitness, both central and peripheral, because when you need the mitochondria to be able to be part of that shift to tolerating more carbs, where then you kind of hit that button and you create that X, and you can figuratively feel like you can eat whatever you want for a day or two and nothing really changes on the scale or how the mirror looks. Whereas other situations, you would notice it right away and feel really, really yuck. So those are the three core values that I would use, but I think it's also important that I rationalize them with their links to training, not just because I only care about one thing, I only care about nutrition. I find it very strange that anybody would advise on nutrition without having the direct links to understanding the training or even any of the normal biological processes.